Milwaukee police found body parts in a North Side apartment, and now they wonder if they've uncovered some kind of death factory. Police hired a private contractor to haul a refrigerator and a tank of acid out of the apartment in the 900 block of North 25th Street. Police found parts of bodies, leading them to believe the man they arrested is a mass murderer.
The officers were stopped by an individual who claimed he was in the apartment and became engaged in a dispute with the owner of the apartment.
A 31-year-old man was arrested at that apartment. This case could get national attention and could be the most gruesome case we have seen in Milwaukee in years.
On May 21, 1960, Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. As a child, due to a congenital skull defect, he had brain surgery and spent long hours sitting alone quietly and spent less time with peers and others. His father, Lionel Dahmer, a chemist, was often away from home for his studies and work. And his mother, Joyce Dahmer, suffering from severe depression, stayed in bed, taking heavy doses of sedatives and sleeping pills daily. Because of this, in Dahmer's childhood home, his parents fought and argued constantly, leaving him neglected without proper care or attention. In the backyard of his home in Bath Township, Ohio, Jeffrey Dahmer showed an unusual hobby, unlike other kids, which was habitually collecting animal carcasses. His chemist father taught him this to talk with his introverted son, focusing on how to preserve animal bones. The father saw it merely as a simple science hobby or taxidermy, but unexpectedly, Dahmer later used this knowledge to dissolve bodies. In 1978, their conflict finally led to divorce proceedings. The mother sued the father for domestic abuse, and the father countered, citing her drug addiction. As the legal battle peaked, the father left home, moving to a nearby motel, and in June that year, the divorce was officially finalized. The mother also left for another state with only his brother David. According to psychiatric analysis, this childhood environment is evaluated as an initial condition for his desire to completely control others' bodies. Inside the Bath home in Ohio left by his parents, 18-year-old Jeffrey Dahmer was left completely alone, and his backyard body dissolving work began moving into the living room and basement. A few days later, on June 18, 1978, 19-year-old Stephen Mark Hicks, while hitchhiking, entered the house where Dahmer lived, and Dahmer suddenly struck his head with a steel dumbbell. Dahmer moved Hicks's dead body to the basement, dismembered it, and buried the remains in the backyard soil. Hicks was reported missing at the time, but the investigation did not reach the Bath home backyard. In the fall of 1978, Dahmer entered Ohio State University, but dropped out after one semester due to heavy drinking and poor grades, and the following year he prepared to enlist in the U.S. Army. Before leaving the house, the body he hurriedly buried a year ago was dug up again to destroy it completely, and after breaking down the flesh and bones, he scattered the remains across the woods behind the house. This was his first attempt to destroy evidence. From 1979 to 1981, Dahmer served as a medic at a U.S. Army base in West Germany, but his alcohol dependence worsened during service, leading to repeated unauthorized absences and violations. Ultimately deemed unfit for service by the military, Dahmer was discharged in March 1981. In the same year, as the Ohio home was foreclosed, Dahmer moved to the house of his grandmother, Catherine Dahmer, in West Allis, Milwaukee, and got a night shift job at Ambrosia Chocolate Factory. Returning after the night shift, he spent most of the day at his grandmother's home, so his activities gradually shifted to the nighttime, and from 1986 he loitered around downtown clubs, actively searching for targets.
In my opinion, he appeared to me to be a geek. By that I mean a guy that stays to himself and just do weird things, unlike anyone else, like suspicious, but not to the degree that you would think that he was around murdering people. You would think that he's just not affiliated with being around things with the happenings, but a square type of guy.
In September 1987, an incident occurred at the Ambassador Hotel in downtown Milwaukee. Dahmer took 25-year-old Stephen Tuomi, whom he met downtown, to the hotel room he booked. The next morning, finding Tuomi dead in the room, Dahmer put the body in a large bag, moved it to his grandmother's basement, and dismembered it. From 1987 to 1989, Dahmer lured and killed a total of 3 men at his grandmother's house. While his grandmother slept upstairs, he lured them to the basement, killed them, and disposed of the bodies, and the victims were mostly from socially marginalized groups. In January 1988, James Buckstater, a 14-year-old Native American boy, who was a runaway loitering around the downtown bus station, accepted accepted Dahmer's offer to pay for photos and entered his home. 2 months later, in March, leaving a downtown bar to go home, 21-year-old Hispanic youth Richard Guerrero also got into Dahmer's car for money and was led down to the basement. And in March 1989, a 26-year-old black youth met at a downtown pub and aspiring model, Anthony Sears, followed Dahmer's offer to drink more and in the basement became the third victim. The disappearances of these racial minorities and marginalized people were treated by law enforcement as mere runaways or temporary absences, and initial investigations were not even launched. Dahmer dismembered the bodies in the basement and used chemicals to erase traces, but he could not stop the foul odor from the rotting bodies. From the basement vents and the yard corner, unexplained foul odors began to occur periodically. His grandmother did not know exactly what Dahmer did in the basement, but suffering severely from the bizarre stench for years, she complained several times about Dahmer's abnormal behavior, and neighbors' complaints were also repeated. During this series of crimes, Dahmer was sentenced to 1 year for child molestation and arrested again for indecent exposure in downtown Milwaukee, but he was granted a work release program. By this measure, he was held in jail during the day and went to the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory at night to perform night shift labor, returning to jail at dawn, continuing this unusual prison life. In May 1990, as his 1-year sentence neared its end, unable to bear the stench filling the house and her grandson's suspicious lifestyle anymore, his grandmother demanded he evict immediately, saying, "Get out of my house," and being kicked out, the last victim's skull kept in the basement, and other remains were hidden in a box as he left. The place he chose was an old 3-story apartment in a marginalized area of South Milwaukee, where he rented Oxford Apartments Unit 213 for $300 a month. As soon as he moved in, instead of ordinary daily items inside Unit 213, he placed large kitchen knife sets and chemical reagent bottles. The unit had a bathtub right next to the narrow hallway, connecting the entrance and kitchen in a small studio layout. In the same month, Raymond Smith, a 33-year-old black man met at a downtown gay bar, entered Unit 213 following Dahmer's offer to buy drinks. Dahmer incapacitated Smith with a drugged drink and killed him, and dismembered the body in the apartment bathtub. Then he kept his ID in the bedroom closet. A month later, in June 1990, met in downtown Milwaukee, 28-year-old black youth Edward Smith, in the same way, was killed and dismembered in Unit 213. Afterward, Dahmer, by offering monetary rewards, lured them to continue human experiments. Ernest Miller, David Thomas, Curtis Slaughter, Errol Lindsay, and Tony Hughes, racial minorities and socially marginalized people, were lured into Unit 213 one after another before the Comex synthesomphone incident occurred. The total number of victims killed inside Unit 213 reached 7. Like this, since mid-1990, Dahmer mixed sleeping pills into drinks inside Unit 213. Incapacitated targets killed them, and using a kitchen knife set, similar crime patterns of dismembering bodies were repeated. The whole process was captured step by step on the Polaroid camera, and the prints piled up in the dresser under the bed, and the victims' bags were organized like trophies in the bedroom closet. As the killings accumulated, his method of handling bodies became sophisticated. From the early method of simply dismembering and discarding bodies, it later changed to dissolving bodies using drums and acid, and gradually shifted to washing and collecting skulls in the closet. Furthermore, drilling holes in skulls with an electric drill, pouring acid or boiling water inside, acts resembling human experimentation continued, and in trial transcripts regarding the reason for this mutilation, that he wanted to make them someone who would never disappear, he reportedly testified to that effect. As this routine repeated inside Unit 213, the first abnormal sign to appear nearby was the odor. According to some apartment residents, whenever passing the hallway along with the foul stench of rotting animal carcasses at night beyond the inner wall of Unit 213, noises like a chainsaw or tools cutting something were reportedly leaking out. As residents' complaints repeated, the landlord slid warnings through the door gap several times, but Unit 213 never opened even once. A year later, through the search blueprint of Unit 213 confirmed by a police raid, it was revealed as a space strictly separated for body disposal, and the shocking reality of the odor and noise neighbors suffered was finally revealed to the outside in May 1991. As the manager's odor warnings continued for Unit 213, Dahmer immediately visited a chemical store in downtown Milwaukee to buy a 250-liter blue plastic drum and highly concentrated acid reagents, then brought them to the apartment. The drum, large enough to fit an adult male body whole, was soon placed on one side of Unit 213 living room. Afterward, crimes began to handle bodies in a different way than before. Dismembered body parts went inside the drum, and highly concentrated strong acid was poured over them. Over time, most tissues except bones decomposed. When unsolved bone fragments completely settled at the bottom, Dahmer Dahmer repeated the process of recovering them, but even after the new disposal method began, the odor in the hallways and stairs didn't disappear, and residents' complaints continued. Around 10 p.m. on May 27, 1991, on the hallway floor in front of Oxford Apartments Unit 213, a boy lay naked. Unable to support himself, the boy crawled on the floor, completely unfocused and unable to express himself. Glenda Cleveland, a resident passing the hallway, witnessed the abnormal state and called the police immediately. Soon, a patrol car arrived and 3 officers entered the hallway. Noticing the commotion, Dahmer also came out of Unit 213, telling officers that the boy was his 19-year-old partner and that they just had an argument from heavy drinking. Gathered residents shouted, "Unknown liquid is leaking from his body, and he is clearly a minor," blocking the officers. According to later investigation records, there were signs of injury and bleeding on the boy's scalp, but the scene police did not closely check his physical condition. Instead of testimonies from minority residents in marginalized areas, the officers accepted only the statement of Dahmer, a neatly dressed white adult, as the primary truth. They even helped the collapsed boy up and personally laid him on the bed inside Unit 213, and as they left, the door firmly closed again. The boy was Cormac Cullen, a 14-year-old minor from a Laotian immigrant family. Shortly after the police left, Cormac was killed, and Dahmer's crimes continued between June and July of that year, resulting in 4 additional victims. On June 30, 1991, Dahmer approached 20-year-old Matt Turner at a downtown bus stop, offering to pay him for modeling for photos at his apartment. He brought Turner to Unit 213. Just a week later, on July 7, Dahmer approached 23-year-old Jeremiah Weinberger, who was loitering near Milwaukee's Grand Avenue Mall, offering a specific amount of $100 for photos. Weinberger bought beer with Dahmer at a nearby market and crossed the threshold of Unit 213. In mid-July, the crime location remained downtown. On July 12, Dahmer spotted 23-year-old Oliver Lacey walking near the same mall, offered him money, and brought him to the apartment. Lacey, after entering the room, lost consciousness after drinking a beverage Dahmer pre-drugged. On July 19, Dahmer, at a bus stop around Milwaukee's Marquette University campus, approached 25-year-old Joseph Braidhoft waiting for the next bus. On the pretext of paying him for helping with work, he lured him to Unit 213 via public transit. Of the 4 men, including those who entered earlier, no one was seen coming out of the apartment again. Neighbors' reports and suspicious glances regarding Unit 213 closed without further investigation during the scene response. On the night of July 22, 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer promised money to 32-year-old Tracy Edwards, met downtown, and brought him to Unit 213. Dahmer offered a drugged drink as usual, but Edwards detected an unusual, strange odor from the drink and refused to drink more due to a strange chemical taste. Edwards acted contrary to Dahmer's expectations. Dahmer put a metal handcuff on Edwards' wrist and threatened him with a kitchen knife. So Edwards, to avoid provoking Dahmer, saying, "I want to be your friend, I don't need money, and let's lie on the bed together with the handcuff on," reassured Dahmer through psychological tactics and began looking for a chance to escape.
You know, it was like he changed with it at times. Then he would get more aggressive, try to get me to handcuff myself, both hands, and he's told me it made him feel more dominant, like he was listening to my heart, because at a point he told me he was going to eat my heart at that point. When I was on the floor, he had it pointed at my groin area at that time.
Did he ask to engage in any homosexual acts with you?
None whatsoever. And then at certain points, he would change. I guess if you want to put it together in time, every 30 minutes, 20 minutes, something like that, you know.
After a 5-hour standoff, taking advantage of Dahmer's distraction, Edwards punched him in the face, unlocked the door chain and multiple locks with his bare hands after a struggle, and finally succeeded in escaping into the hallway, passing the main gate and running onto the street. He blocked a passing patrol car, showed the metal handcuff on his wrist, and reported the confinement and weapon threat inside Unit 213. At 11:50 p.m., 2 responding patrol officers knocked on Unit 213 door with Edwards, and soon the door opened, revealing Dahmer. Dahmer, who already had police visit before, initially in a very calm manner like last time, explained that the handcuff was just a misunderstanding and led officers to the bedroom to get the key. But one officer searching the bedroom dresser found inside a drawer his upper with photos Dahmer had collected during scenes of dismembered body parts. The scene's atmosphere changed rapidly as officers immediately tried to arrest and handcuff him. The calm Dahmer suddenly resisted violently, but was immediately subdued by another officer. After midnight, detectives and forensics requested for backup arrived at the scene. Police lines were set up around the apartment, and as investigators entered Unit 213, the reality of the secret room began to unfold. Inside the kitchen, refrigerator and freezer, refrigerated human heads, human tissue in sealed containers, and an unpackaged human heart were found one after another. A total of 4 head remains was secured from the kitchen area, while Dahmer was taken to the Milwaukee police headquarters in a patrol car. Evidence collection continued during a full search of the bedroom closet and dresser, along with multiple ID of the victims. 6 additional human skulls with flesh removed and bleach were found. Then, opening a large 250-liter plastic drum in the corner of the living room, it was filled with acid solution to decompose bodies, revealing 3 human torsos and skeletons dissolving in chemicals.
The suspect may well have been involved in at least 17 homicides. 17 homicides which our investigation indicates, some of which may have occurred outside the city of Milwaukee.
Forensics collected 84 Polaroid photos found under the bed and all the human remains inside the apartment. A detailed forensic analysis which revealed that in Unit 213 of the Oxford apartments alone, remains of 11 victims were discovered. Through Dahmer's later confession, 1 additional dissolved body, 1 case at his Ohio home, 1 at a hotel, and 3 cases at his grandmother's home were revealed, bringing the 13-year crime spree's final death toll to 17.
Police won't confirm a newspaper report that Dahmer has confessed to murder and cannibalism. One longtime acquaintance describes Dahmer as one weird dude. A neighbor offered a similar description.
While investigators moved the remains out of the apartment, residents gathered and tension around the scene spread rapidly. As the Comac Sinter-Somphon case became known later, public criticism of the police response intensified, leading to controversy over law enforcement's failure. On January 30, 1992, in a Milwaukee County courtroom, the trial evaluating Dahmer's mental state began. As the defense filed for leniency based on insanity, the court began hearings to judge his legal accountability, and the trial proceeded to jury review.
You took my 17-year-old son away from me. I'll never get a chance to tell him that I loved him.
We lost, you destroyed the baby of the family, and I hope you go to hell.
Whatever your name is, Satan, I'm mad. This is how you act when you are out of control. I don't want to ever see my mother have to go through this again. Never, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I hate you, mother. I hate you.
2 weeks later, on February 15, the jury reviewed the evidence collected, including 84 Polaroid photos from the apartment, ruling that Dahmer was sane during the crimes. And 2 days later, the court upheld 15 murder charges, sentencing him to consecutive life terms without parole.
Case number F912542, a special verdict. Question 1. At the time the crime was committed in count 1 of the information, did the defendant, Jeffrey L. Dahmer, have a mental disease? Answer, no. As to count 1, the court will impose a mandatory life sentence. Count 2, life imprisonment. Count 3, life imprisonment. Count 4, life imprisonment. Count 5, count 6, count 7, count 8, count 9, count 10, count 11, count 12, count 13, count 14, count 15, life imprisonment. I intended to follow the recommendation of the state. The important point is that the sentence is structured in such a way that this defendant will never again see freedom. That is owed to this community in order to protect the community, as well as acknowledgement of the seriousness of the offenses.
Dahmer, whose sentence was finalized at the maximum security, was transferred to Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, and outside the courtroom right after the sentencing, civil lawsuit proceedings of the victims' families began. In May 1991, after escaping from Dahmer, but being handed back to the killer by police error, including the Comac Sinter-Somphon case, the families, against the city of Milwaukee and the police, filed a lawsuit for damages. After about 3 years of legal battle, the Milwaukee Common Council accepted liability and paid a total of $847,500 to Comac Sinter-Somphon's family, meaning based on current Korean won value adjusted for inflation, paying a settlement reaching about 2.5 billion won. The lawsuit was concluded, and the Oxford apartment where the crimes occurred was demolished under the Milwaukee City Council's approval. Dahmer, under protective custody in a solitary cell early on, later, according to changes in prison internal guidelines, was assigned to the general population via the Emotional Management Unit. Then, on the morning of November 28, 1994, while cleaning in the prison gym cleaning area. Dahmer, by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver, with an iron exercise bar from the gym, was struck on the skull and was moved by ambulance but died before reaching the hospital. Right after death confirmation, some forensic medical institutions discussed preserving brain tissue for research purposes due to family opposition lawsuits and the court's final order. The preservation process was stopped and the biological tissue was discarded. In 1996, some seized assets and personal items of Dahmer kept as court evidence for civil damage enforcement placed the crisis of being distributed through public auction. As families worrying about gossip and social backlash followed, a group of businessmen in the Milwaukee area raised funds and purchased those items in bulk to prevent external leakage. Right after purchase, the items were moved to a disposal facility. As seized items and photos were cleared according to disposal procedures, the Dahmer case that shook the Milwaukee community came to an end.
Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me. And as my obsession grew, I was saving body parts such as skulls and skeletons, and eventually I did turn to cannibalism. I'd have the sleeping pill mixture already prepared. A person would drink it, fall asleep, and that's when they would be strangled. I wish I could say that it just left completely, but no, there are times when I still do have the old compulsions. That's what I deserve. I deserve death.
While residents' foul odors, reports, visits, and warnings were repeated, the door of Unit 213 remained closed, and the steps of complacent police arriving at the front door multiple times ultimately failed to save something. The most dangerous secret room is not a hidden place, but was recorded as existing behind an ordinary door everyone passes by.
But Bundy is also the target of investigations of somewhere around 20 murders in the western United States, all involving young women.
I think I stand about as much chance of dying in front of a firing squad or in a gas chamber as you do being killed in a plane flight home. Let's hope you don't.
Today at age 32, Theodore Robert Bundy stood in a Florida courtroom and listened to a judge describe his pending death in the Florida electric chair.
It is further ordered that on such scheduled date that you be put to death by a current of electricity, and such current of electricity shall continue to pass through your body until you are dead.
On November 24, 1946, a home for unwed mothers in Burlington, Vermont, a baby boy was born with the father's name blank on his birth certificate. His name was Ted Bundy. He grew up thinking his grandparents in Tacoma, Washington were his parents, and his birth mother was his older sister. Before becoming an adult, he learned the truth about his birth. As a young man in Tacoma, Ted Bundy was viewed as diligent. Entering the University of Washington as a psychology major, he studied human defense mechanisms and trust structures. Starting from 1969, as a volunteer at the Seattle Suicide Prevention Center, over the phone, he repeatedly observed the reactions of people in crisis. In the early 1970s, Ted Bundy was seen as a Washington state Republican activist. Dressed in a neat suit, he blended naturally with local figures. His quick judgment and polite manner won the trust around him. Then, in 1973, his relationship with lover Stephanie Brooks ended. According to US FBI analysis, afterward, he began pursuing women with specific looks and backgrounds. In January 1974, the name Ted Bundy moved to the front of investigation files. In the early hours of January 4, 1974, a residential area near the University of Washington, Karen Sparks, then a sophomore majoring in accounting, was found in critical condition, struck with a metal rod torn from her bed frame.
My name is Karen Epley. On January 4th, 1974, I was attacked and left for dead.
Ted Bundy's first victim?
I believe so, yes. One of the only that survived. I was living in the U District, studying political science. He came into my home, took a bed frame off of my bed, and smashed my skull. And he used probably the same bed frame, smashed it into my vagina and into my bladder. My bladder was totally split, so it was horrible. My roommate Bob thought I was still sleeping. Later on, he went down and checked me again, and there he found the blood, and it was just horrible for him to find me that way. And next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital, and I thought, uh-oh, this is really bad. And so I asked my father, I said, Dad, what happened? And he said, well, you had a little bump in your head.
A month later, a senior in Chinese and host of an early morning radio ski report, Linda Ann Healy vanished without a trace from her university dorm. Only bloodstains remained on the bed sheets, and part of her remains, about a year after her disappearance, would be found on Taylor Mountain, east of Seattle, Washington. 2 months later, evening of March 12, 1974, Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, freshman Dahmer Gail Manson, to attend a campus jazz concert, left her dormitory room, walking down a dark campus path without streetlight. Her footsteps stopped for good that night. Cases occurred one after another, but scattered across jurisdictions, they were not connected. As months passed, June arrived. Early hours of June 11, this time in a narrow alley near the University of Washington dorms, a key participant in the local Daffodil Festival, 18-year-old Jorgen Hawkins, was walking toward her dormitory. A man spoke in the dark, and she suddenly vanished after that night. June 17, Lake Sammamish State Park, a man with a white arm cast approached young women to help move luggage. Probation officer Janice Ott and student Denise Naslund disappeared from the park that day. Later, in witness statements, a tan Volkswagen Beetle and a name Ted repeatedly appeared. The King County Sheriff's Office, in charge of investigation, made little progress. Around March 1975, a valley on Taylor Mountain, in the rough brush, damaged remains like women's skulls and jawbones were found. The King County Medical Examiner's Office secured the scene and began investigating. Later, through forensic identification, the remains were identified as UW Chinese Major Senior Linda Ann Healy, University of Washington student Jorgen Hawkins, Central Washington State College student Susan Elaine Rancourt, college student Roberta Kathleen Parks from Corvallis, Oregon, and Brenda Carroll Ball. But for these remains to the previous serial disappearances to be officially connected, more time was required. During the same period, Ted Bundy left Washington State and moved to Salt Lake City, Utah. Then enrolling in the University of Utah Law School, he stayed there and continued his life. October 2, holiday near Salt Lake City, Utah. 16-year-old high schooler Nancy Wilcox disappeared after being seen near her home. Less than a month later, Halloween night, October 31, a road near a park in Murray, Utah, leaving her friends and walking alone toward a convenience store. 17-year-old Laura Ann Aim vanished without a trace. About 20 days later, she would be found by American Fork Canyon River. The Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office received reports of successive disappearances. In the U.S. at the time, across state lines, no computer network existed to share crime information in real time. Consequently, with the similar disappearances in Washington state, the investigation proceeded without any connection, as investigative records and data were individually organized. The commonly repeated object was a Volkswagen Beetle. From an outside view, the passenger seat space looked empty. Inside the vehicle, only the driver's seat was confirmed in a peculiar structure. However, whether investigators then directly checked inside the vehicle is unclear in records. Given investigative practices where cases involving missing person vehicles rarely ended with just an exterior check, the interior was highly likely exposed during the inspection process. Even if checked inside, it was a time with no comparable case data. The structure with the passenger seat removed is presumed to be viewed as a peculiar personal modification. The vehicle's connection to crime, a year later during the Utah arrests, would only be revealed after the vehicle was seized. November 8, 1974, a shopping mall parking lot in Murray, Utah, who just graduated high school and worked as a mall clerk. 18-year-old Carol Dalranch was shown a police badge by a man. Hearing that someone tried to break into her car, she followed him into the passenger seat of a Volkswagen Beetle.
A man approached me and said, "Is your license plate KAD-032?" And I said yes, and he introduced himself as Officer Roseland, and he said that someone had been caught trying to break into my car. And then this is where we came out of, right here, and walked through this parking lot. I told him there was nothing missing, and he...
During the drive, the man used a weapon to threaten her, so she pushed open the passenger door, threw herself out, and barely escaped. That night, a high school parking lot in Bountiful, 30 minutes from Murray, Deborah Kent, leaving after watching a play, disappeared. On the asphalt, a single handcuffed key was left lying alone. The Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office recovered the key, but she did not return. January 12, 1975, a ski resort in Aspen, Colorado. Karen Campbell, a 23-year-old ordinary nurse on vacation with her fiancé, vanished after heading to the room hallway from the lobby to get something. A few months later, by Pickens County investigators, the skull of the remains found in a nearby hill showed clear signs of a depressed fracture, but coordination among Washington, Utah, and Colorado agencies had not yet been established. The pattern of roaming near similar crime scenes with the same car unchanged. The trail of the pursuit was cut off every time the jurisdiction changed. Early hours of August 16, 1975, outskirts of Granger, Utah, the Volkswagen Beetle speeding with its headlights off was spotted by Utah Highway Patrol Officer Bob Hayward. Finding it suspicious, the officer signaled it to stop, but the car ignored it, turned into an alley, and stopped only at a dead end. The approaching officer's gaze turned to the face through the driver's window. and inside the car of this man, who identified as Ted Bundy, the passenger seat was missing. On the floor, a crowbar and stockings with eye holes cut out were scattered. 2 days later, from the seized car, a weapon, 2 pairs of handcuffs, and fake plaster cast flame poured out. Released on bail, Ted Bundy sold the car, but investigators found the buyer and dismantled the body, lifting the carpet, presumably used to load a body. The bare metal floor and 4 missing C-ticks in both holes were revealed, which exactly matched the car with an empty passenger seat in past case records. Re-examining past unsolved kidnapping case records, the Bureau, from a Volkswagen with its passenger seat removed a year ago, tricked into boarding by Ted Bundy with a fake police badge but barely escaping. Located and urgently summoned survivor Carol Dalrange, the lineup room of the Utah 3rd District Court, among several male suspects. Her fingertip pointed precisely at Ted Bundy. June 7, 1977, the courthouse in Aspen, Colorado. Preparing for the Karen Campbell murder trial, Ted Bundy was in the second floor library. At the moment the guards were changing shifts, taking advantage of a temporary lapse in surveillance, he opened a window, jumped down to the lawn, and fled. The Picken County Sheriff's Office immediately deployed search teams, but he had already escaped into the mountains outside Aspen. However, 6 days later, coming down to town in a starving state, driving a stolen car, he was spotted by patrolling police and rearrested on the spot. Afterward, he was transferred to Glenwood Springs Jail. For months, Ted Bundy intentionally left his delivered meals, and his weight quickly dropped by 7 kg. Measuring only about 30 cm by 30 cm, the purpose was to fit his frame through the cell ceiling vents. On the night of December 30, 1977, Ted Bundy pushed his slim body into the vent hole and entered the space inside the ceiling. Crawling along the narrow passage above the structure, he broke through the jailer's quarter ceiling, came down, and exited the main gate. The next morning, what the guards faced was just Ted Bundy's empty bed in the torn open ceiling hole. Succeeding in escaping once again, he began moving, using a vehicle stolen near the jail. Later, passing through Detroit, Michigan, he transferred between trains and buses, moving south to Florida. The FBI's pursuit network expanded along state lines. The media across the U.S. covered the twice-escaped murder suspect's flight and the investigation's progress. Ted Bundy arrived in Tallahassee, Florida, using the alias Chris Hagen. He rented an apartment near Florida State University, where he was seen outwardly as a quiet and neat figure. 3 a.m., January 15, 1978, Tallahassee, Florida. The old lock of the Florida State University Chi Omega sorority house opened. At the end of the silent hallway, in the first bedroom, an FSU art history senior, Margaret Bowman, was struck on the head with a logged weapon and killed. Soon after, in the next room, majoring in fashion merchandising, sophomore Lisa Levy was also attacked while defenseless. Tallahassee police forensics results showed on her body surface, heavily bitten by the killer's teeth. Bite marks clearly leaving the upper and lower alignment shape were found. The attacks continued along the dorm floor. 2 female students were found inside their rooms with severe injuries. The intruder escaped the sorority house and fled outside. A few blocks away, the home of another FSU student, Cheryl Thomas, wore the next path. The same weapon was wielded, leaving her severely injured on the scene. From the floor of the house, a stocking mask with only the eyes cut out was recovered.
I had 5 skull fractures and multiple contusions in my head. And because of the skull fractures, the 8th nerve was damaged and I lost the hearing in my left ear and the equilibrium. And I had a broken jaw. And my left shoulder was pulled out of joint.
The Tallahassee Police Department collected bodily fluid traces from the mask surface and secured the teeth marks left on the victims' bodies via photos and plaster casts. As a result of the events that unfolded for an hour between 3 and 4 a.m., 2 died at the sorority house and 1 was severely injured at the nearby home. The masks recovered from the scene and especially the teeth mark alignment, which varies by individual, through precise analysis by forensic scientists, became key physical evidence heading to court. On February 9, 1978, after dismissal hours at Lake City Junior High School in Florida, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach went missing. According to witnesses, a white van loitering near the school was last spotted by a school staff member, and Kimberly Leach never returned. Ted Bundy traveled all over Florida, committing crimes while changing stolen cars' license plates. Inside the stolen vehicle secured by Florida Highway Patrol and investigators, from the driver's seat, a small fiber from Kimberly Leach's clothing was detected. Early hours of February 15, 1978, a road outside Pensacola, Florida. A Pensacola Police Department patrol car ran the license plate of a driving Volkswagen and found it was stolen. As the patrol car blocked the vehicle fleeing into an alley, ignoring the stop signal, the vehicle finally came to a stop. The driver's door opened and Ted Bundy tried to flee, but his officer, David Lee, pursued. He was arrested on the scene shortly after. Ted Bundy claimed his alias Kenneth Messner, but ID and credit cards under other names poured out from his pocket. Ted Bundy, who was on the FBI's most wanted list, after his arrest that day, never walked out of a detention facility again. July 1979, the 11th Judicial Circuit Court in Miami, Florida, defendant Ted Bundy of the Chi Omega sorority murder case, sat at the defense table and faced the jury. The court proceedings were broadcast nationwide through the media. The bite marks and teeth model left on victim Lisa Levy's body were presented as court evidence through forensic scientist Richard Suviron. The second right incisor was asymmetrically twisted inward as a result of matching the model over photos of the victim's skin. The teeth alignment and wound shape were shown to match. On July 24, the jury returned a guilty verdict and a death sentence was handed down. Ted Bundy remarked to the effect that this court would see him again. Afterward, appeals procedures to delay the execution followed. During years of ongoing appeal, investigative records scattered nationwide began to be organized into one. Taylor Mountain in Washington State, the hills of Aspen, Colorado, and the remains found at multiple locations in Utah were reviewed for connections during the investigative analysis. In April 1978, at Pigsty site near Lake City, Florida, the remains of Kimberly Leach were found, and her identity was confirmed through forensic comparison. In the following trial, he was sentenced to death once again. In 1984, the Florida Supreme Court finally recognized the legal validity of the bite mark evidence, and the execution date was finalized for January 1989. FBI investigators visited his cell. In the final interview record, Ted Bundy left the number 30, and the possibility of the actual victims being more was mentioned on the evening of January 23, 1989, near the Bradford County Prison in Florida. Large crowds and media reporters gathered ahead of the execution. Some crowds held pro-execution chants and signs, making the scene chaotic. Following the execution at 7:16 a.m. the next day, the case investigations that spanned from 1974 to 1978 were officially closed.
You are not guilty. I'm not guilty. Does that include the time I stole a comic book when I was 5 years old? I am not guilty of the charges which have been filed against me. And the allegation. And I'll tell you, as long as they attempt to keep their heads in the sand about me, there's going to be people turning up in canyons, and there are going to be people being shot in Salt Lake City because the police there aren't willing to accept what I think they know, and they know that I didn't do these things. You know, I'm perfectly happy with the person I am, and I've always been.
People feared monsters, but what he offered was a police badge and a hand asking for small help. The trust connecting the community became the most perfect disguise. An unsuspected normalcy evaded the pursuit network for years. Ultimately, the most dangerous malice is not a foreign fear, but wearing the most familiar face of trust, leaving a mark in U.S. crime history. Through a tiny needle hole in the Roman IV bag, heart-slowing fluid begins flowing into the veins. Soon, the patient's heart stops, and as the EKG monitor goes flat, the nurse heads to the next hospital. On February 22, 1960, in a home in West Orange, New Jersey, CharlesCullen was born as the youngest of 8. He lost his father at just 7 months old, and was raised by a mother raising 8 kids alone. In high school, his mother also died in a car crash. Cullen identified his mother's body in a morgue, and he reportedly made multiple self-harm attempts after. As an adult, Cullen joined the Navy and began ship duty. But shortly after, a forced discharge was decided. Military records did not state the specific reason for discharge, and he returned to society. In 1984, CharlesCullen entered Mountainside Hospital, School of Nursing in New Jersey, graduating 2 years later with his nursing license. He was later hired by St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, with over 100 years of history. This place was a large hospital with roughly over 600 beds, one of the oldest and largest in New Jersey. At this hospital, a major regional medical hub at the time, Cullen was assigned to the burn intensive care unit with critical patients. In the intensive care unit environment with repeated urgent treatments and the complex structure of a large hospital, the medications the nurse injected into patients fell into a blind spot difficult to monitor in real time. High-risk drugs always stocked in the ward were given to patients through the nurse's hands, but EMR and drug management systems were not linked then. So prescription, dispensing, and dosing records were managed manually step by step, making any anomalies that could occur during administration, namely drug abuse, difficult to track in real time. In the 1980s, the U.S. medical field faced a severe shortage of nursing staff, and hospitals urgent to secure staffing, once their license was verified, hired and deployed them immediately without separate background checks. At the same time, if info on a former employee's discipline or suspicious acts was shared as employment risk, concerns over legal disputes like defamation grew. So most hospitals defensively confirmed only employment status and dates. This practice, known as the silent reference, consequently allowed problematic staff to move freely between medical institutions, creating a structural vulnerability and at the same time an environment where hospitals could not fully identify dangerous individuals during hiring. As a result, a vicious cycle of firing problematic staff in an unverified movement between hospitals repeated. On June 11, 1988, at St. Barnabas Medical Center in New Jersey, patient John Y. passed away. During the subsequent investigation, a lethal dose of insulin was found to be injected via an Roman 4 bag, which was classified as the first death linked to Charles Cullen. However, the death was treated as an individual medical case then. And though insulin overdose causes severe hypoglycemia and can quickly lead to loss of consciousness and cardiac arrest, it was hard to distinguish from acute worsening of illness. Due to these traits, it was not recognized as a crime, allowing Cullen to continue working in the ward afterward. In the late 1980s, U.S. hospitals introduced the PICES automated dispensing system for high-risk drug control, where the drawer opened only when a nurse entered patient info and drugs, and all withdrawals were logged electronically. However, there was a fatal loophole in this process. If a cancellation was executed right after withdrawal, the cancellation was recorded on the system, but as the unlock signal delayed, the drawer opened for a brief moment. And even if medications were actually taken during this process, they were not reflected in the withdrawal logs. This abnormal drug withdrawal pattern using the time gap was repeatedly found in the Pennsylvania hospital logs, leading to cases where high-risk drugs like digoxin and epinephrine were administered. Digoxin, known as a silent heart regulator, is a powerful cardiotonic prescribed for heart failure or arrhythmia, a drug that regulates heart muscle contractions. At proper doses, it helps the weakened heartbeat pump normally. But even a slight overdose destabilizes heart rhythm and disrupts beats, and exceeding a certain level can lead to cardiac arrest. The process was so quiet and natural, it was easily mistaken in the word for worsening illness or old age, making the artificial injection hard to detect before an autopsy. Because of this, Charles Cullen's crimes did not surface immediately. Epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, is a powerful stimulant mainly injected to revive cardiac arrest patients, serving to rapidly elevate blood pressure and heart rate. Conversely, if administered in high concentrations to a normal patient, an immediate physical reaction occurs with excessive strain on the cardiovascular system, which can lead to fatal results. This creates a reaction similar to an emergency, having the characteristic to cause chaos within the ward. From a certain point inside St. Barnabas Medical Center, suspicious circumstances began to be detected. Tiny holes seemingly pierced by needles were found in Roman 4 bags, and the times of patients' deaths and Charles Cullen's shift repeatedly overlapped in reported cases. However, the hospital chose resignation advice instead of an investigation or police request, and as Cullen moved to other hospitals, this pattern continued for about 16 years. While working at Phillipsburg Warren Hospital from 1993 to 1997, cases of digoxin administration to specific patients were repeatedly reported. During the hospital HR investigation, Cullen's ID access records were confirmed to match the times of patient deaths. But citing the lack of decisive evidence, the internal probe closed and he was fired. During his subsequent process of changing to other hospitals, as the silent reference continued to occur, his changing jobs repeated in a similar pattern.
There were several instances when I found out through the evidence that he had actually murdered people right in front of me, and I didn't see it. Even my mind didn't go there. I noticed that he did things that I questioned, but because he was so brilliant and he was one of the best nurses I ever worked with, I didn't question him in the way that I might have questioned another nurse. I trusted him, and we had that bond, that very trusting bond. So I didn't leap from, gee, I wouldn't have done it that way, to, oh my God, I think he's murdering someone. You don't make that paradigm shift unless somebody tells you that there's a murderer right there. You can't make that leap. It just doesn't make any sense.
From 1998 to 2002, at Pennsylvania Liberty Nursing and Rehabilitation Center and St. Luke's Hospital, similar situations continued. During an internal probe at St. Luke's Hospital, in Cullen's locker, high-risk drugs prohibited from being taken out were found. But fearing legal liability and reputational damage, the hospital handled it internally and fired him. And afterward, he was at Somerville, New Jersey's Somerset Medical Center hired again as a nurse. In early 2003, in a specific ward of Somerset Medical Center in New Jersey, the number of deaths began to surge. Initially, seasonal factors or clusters of severe patients were mentioned, but the mortality rate in that ward, compared to the same period last year, increased to an unusual level exceeding a whopping 300%, a state difficult to understand with existing explanations. In June 2003, right after patient Reuben Hoagland's death, an autopsy was done due to family objections. The coroner precisely analyzed the secured blood sample, and reconfirmation results showed a level exceeding the normal therapeutic range by dozens of times for Dickinson concentration. This is a level that could not be reached by prescribed dosing alone, and the coroner's report specified the possibility of artificial poisoning death. It was the moment the 16-year case flaw was first confirmed by official records. Sensing suspicious circumstances, the hospital began checking abnormal drug patterns, and in July 2003, the Somerset Medical Center pharmacy team, the automated dispensing system, Hikes' system computer log analysis started, revealing shocking results. When the data logs were sorted and filtered by name, CharlesCullen's name was repeatedly confirmed. In his logs, high-risk drugs not prescribed to his patients, such as Dickinson, insulin, and epinephrine, were searched for multiple times, and abnormal records of canceling after attempting withdrawal were confirmed. These records were mainly concentrated during the night shifts and cases of worsening conditions of ward patients at the same time, where a pattern had followed in succession. Accordingly, the pharmacy team officially delivered the analysis results to the hospital management. In October 2003, the analysis results were delivered to an outside New Jersey investigation agency, and the investigation team entered the waste storage of Somerset Medical Center, while Roman 4 bags scheduled for disposal were piled up, as investigators placed each one of them under the light. On the surface not visible to the naked eye, depending on the angle, punctures, meaning tiny holes pierced by a needle, were revealed. As a result of precisely analyzing the internal liquid, insulin unrelated to prescriptions was detected inside the sealed Roman 4 bags. This was definitive evidence from outside the sealed pack, showing that drugs had been injected using a needle. And the team, to see which patients these Roman 4 bags were administered to, began a cross-check with patient medication records. Roman 4 bags used in hospitals are connected to patients countlessly every day. Before administration, what medical staff checked was mostly labels and appearance, and if the seal looked normal, checking inside separately was rare. The issue was that tiny needle holes under 0.5 mm remained on the surface, a size not easily identified under normal lighting. The Roman 4 bags where Cullen injected high-risk drugs were later connected to patients by other medical staff. The drugs entered the patient's vessels during normal Roman 4 administration, but by the time actual adverse reactions appeared, Cullen had already left the scene. Later, as some related data were delivered to the New Jersey Department of Health, the case expanded into a joint investigation by the NJ State Police and Department of Health. At Somerset Medical Center, there was a fellow nurse, Amy Luffren, who often worked night shifts with CharlesCullen. Amy Luffren, while receiving treatment for a heart condition at the time, was continuing her ward duties. The investigation team approached Amy Luffren and told her that CharlesCullen was under investigation as the prime suspect in multiple patient deaths. Investigators explained the possibility that Cullen might have used drugs on her too. And a few days later, Amy Luffren expressed her intent to cooperate with the team. December 12, 2003, at a restaurant in Somerville, New Jersey, Amy Luffren and CharlesCullen sat across from each other. Amy Luffren was wearing a wire installed by the investigation team, and outside the restaurant, New Jersey investigators were waiting. In the conversation recorded during the meal, Cullen did not directly admit to the crimes, but content mentioning specific patients and drugs was included, which was cross-checked with the already secured drug logs and patient death cases. As Amy Luffren stood up after giving the prearranged signal, the waiting investigators entered the restaurant and arrested CharlesCullen. December 14, 2003, in an interrogation room at Somerville Police Station, New Jersey, the interview between CharlesCullen and investigators began, but for 7 hours, Cullen remained completely silent without answering questions. As the standoff continued, Amy Luffren stepped into the interrogation room, and when asked for the reason, Cullen opened his mouth for the first time. According to records, Cullen stated to the effect that I wanted to end the patient's suffering. With that statement as a starting point, the investigation team, the unsolved death cases that occurred during that time, began to analyze as serial cases by the same person, along with the secured physical evidence. The investigation direction also shifted rapidly.
I did, and I had conversations with him. Charlie would not say the word murder. He wouldn't talk about it. However, knowing him and knowing about other serial killers, I believe that it was an obsessive compulsive disorder that just went awry, and he was compelled to kill. He was not a mercy killer. He enjoyed killing. You could see that he was proud of his kills when he confessed to me. me. He was nearly excited to tell people what he had done.
Charles Cullen, regarding his act of harm, claimed it was to end the patient's suffering, justifying himself. But the confirmed victim list included patients in recovery and mild patients who were admitted to general wards. So his remarks and actual actions did not match. His Roman 4 medication method showed the characteristic of not selecting targets or distinguishing conditions, which appeared as a flow connecting to random patients in the ward. There was an unspecific scattering harm that could cause anyone to die.
I haven't, and part of that was because I was a confidential informant. They didn't know anything about me. I did meet a couple of the victims' families when the book came out. It was very emotional, and it was hard for me to really make eye contact with them because I felt so much guilt, and I was able to at least apologize to them. And I think right now with this movie coming out, and there's also a beautiful documentary coming out, a very chilling documentary coming out, I feel like with this particular platform, I can also give a voice to the victims because unfortunately, a lot of people believe that he was a mercy killer. So many of those patients were seen as just being put out of their misery. It was not seen as something brutal. And the tactics in which Charles Cullen murdered these people, it was brutal and it was awful and it was terrifying. And his victims were not all old, and he robbed their opportunity to recover from their illnesses. And he robbed those families of being able to have more time with them. And he did that in a brutal way. So I want to give a voice back to those patients and those victims because they deserve that, and the families deserve that.
From 2004 to 2005, the team across New Jersey and Charles Cullen's 16-year career history investigated all medical records and related materials kept in 9 hospitals in Pennsylvania. At the same time, from past medical waste storage locations, Roman 4 bags with tiny needle holes remaining on the surface were secured, and drug residues not matching prescriptions were detected in liquid analysis results. Cases classified as simple deaths were later reclassified as homicides, and the final confirmed number of murder victims totaled 29. Cullen stated his targets were from dozens up to 400. But many were already cremated or buried without autopsies, and the total scale of damage remained unconfirmed even after the investigation closed. March 2, 2006, the New Jersey Superior Court, for Charles Cullen's 11 indictments, sentenced him to life imprisonment without parole right after he was at Trenton, New Jersey, transferred to the New Jersey State Prison and incarcerated, and his serial killings that continued through 9 hospitals for 16 years since 1987 came to an end like that. In November 2004, the New Jersey legislature, when a medical incident occurs, passed the Patient Safety Act mandating immediate reporting to investigative agencies and the State Department of Health. Through this, each medical institution had to report suspicious cases to outside agencies, and information blocking and autonomous concealment between hospitals were restricted. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services strengthened the National Practitioner Data Bank to ensure medical staff's disciplinary records and reasons for termination cross state lines, building an information network shared in real time. Disciplinary records from a specific hospital became immediately viewable during the next hospital's hiring review, and the practice openly maintained by hospital management, known as the silent reference, disappeared. In 2005, the medical device manufacturers involved removed the unlock delay that occurred during cancel withdrawal commands through patches, and modified the system so all withdrawal attempts are automatically logged, making it impossible to take out drugs without a computer record. Amy Luffren, in an interview conducted after Charles Cullen's arrest, stated he was perceived as a quiet, reliable colleague, and there were no specific clues to suspect the crimes. Recalling the circumstances of the night shifts, even at the time of the investigation team's first contact, she showed a reaction of not accepting the facts immediately, and investigation officials mentioned that without her cooperation, the arrest on that day would have been difficult to achieve. In 2022, Charles Cullen's crime process was reconstructed based on actual investigation records and Amy Luffren's testimony into a movie, The Good Nurse, and through this, it was released on Netflix.
Well, with everything happening now with the movie and talking about it a lot, I couldn't have done this even if it was 10 years ago. I wouldn't have been able to do this. I'm 20 years out now. I am 20 years wiser. I am able to forgive myself for not seeing this sooner. And I think having this platform to be able to apologize to the families that I didn't see sooner, I wish I had. I felt a lot of guilt and a lot of embarrassment that I didn't didn't see how dark he was, and I didn't know that he was harming people, and I felt so bad about that.
Post hiring practices prioritizing the protection of hostile reputations failed to stop Cullen's repeated job changes, and the numerous deaths that occurred after repeated moves remain in people's memories.